But it is great to be with everybody, and I do want to recognize, if you didn't see it, but Women's Health October edition, so it's out right now. One of the game changers in America is our Surgeon General, Nadja West. So let's give her a round of applause. General West has a great, I'm not a graduate of West Point, but the fact that I spent years there as a captain teaching the next generation, I feel like I'm part of the long gray line. But I was ROTC commissioned, but I will tell you, it's a special place. And Colin Powell once said, when you spend any time at West Point, you leave with the love of country stamped on your heart. And it's something that I wrote down, and it's always stuck with me. But Nadja is the highest ranking woman ever to graduate West Point in history. And you're doing phenomenal things. I was just bragging about it. I just came back from Fort Riley late last night, and I saw the new hospital there, the Irwin Medical Center. And let me just tell you a couple things, because it's just fresh in my head. One, when you see it with the waterfall, and it's beautiful building, about 45% more space. It'll cover about 49,000 beneficiaries. But what I loved about it is the fact that when you see the building and you see, it's basically the workout rooms in the front and the first floor with glass, and you see the treadmills, and you see, that to me is what healthcare is about being proactive about healthcare, not just sick care. And of course, we take care of those who get sick, but I think it's a strong message, and it's really state of the art, and it's something that we're very proud. In fact, I was talking to General West about how, when I was leaving, going back to the airport last night, I called Chet Edwards. He was a U.S. congressman from Texas, and he was the chairman of military construction. And when I was, I was only a freshman, then a sophomore U.S. congressman, but I became an appropriator after serving on Armed Services Committee. And when I was an appropriator, I said to him, hey, I'm hearing these things. And he said to me, he goes, I met with these spouses of non-commissioned officers in one of my visits, and they were talking about the need for a hospital, and there at Fort Riley. And he said, I went back and I talked to some of the leaders and said, we really got to do this. We found basically $3 billion extra for military construction that year. And when I told him how this is about to be open, I remember that, and he goes, Patrick, you just made my day, because a lot of times you fight for these things, you don't see the end of the fruition of it. And I said, yes, sir. I said, it was $433 million spent. I was like, but you should see this thing. You got to go visit it. And I'm telling you, it's just awesome. And it was just kind of a nice thing, and it's just nice to be back in the Army family. And as far as healthcare goes, I taught at West Point, Guy, and I appreciate that mentioning that. But before, I was a prosecutor there, and also the general counsel for Keller Army Community Hospital. So I was part of the crew, a small part of it. But let me just give you, if it's okay, and I'm going to spend a lot of time on a question and answer, but a couple things that I want to mention. One, and I want to talk about the Army as a whole, and then how healthcare specifically. But when I left Congress 5.5 years ago, our budget was $243 billion. In the past 5.5 years, we've taken almost a $100 billion cut. Last year was $148 billion, so a 46% cut to be exact. And 5.5 years ago, we didn't have ISIS, and we didn't have Russia invading other countries. We didn't have North Korea being as aggressive as they are. So understanding that as a framework, when we talk about resources within the Army, is important. We are asked now to do more with less. And we lean on folks to do a lot more and to deploy more often, and they are making an incredible sacrifice. So when I was with the Big Red One, and I was PTing with them yesterday morning with Danger 6, Major General Wayne Grisby, he's about to go over to Division Headquarters of Big Red One's about to go over to Iraq. That's his 9th deployment. And I think sometimes as a team, we forget, and again, I know we've all deployed, we've all seen it, but we forget, right now we are in the longest wars in American history, 15 years in Afghanistan and Iraq. And we've asked less than 1% of America to fight and to win these wars. And it's you and your families that give so much. So I wanted to just make sure that I recognize how appreciative I am and our nation is to you. The most well-respected profession in America is our military. And when you ask, when they do the studies of the most well-respected professions in the world, it's actually the military as well, especially the American military. But when you look at the demographics, when I say it's less than 1% that serve and that have served in places like Iraq and Afghanistan, the demographics are not necessarily in our favor as a nation. When you look at, even in Congress, when General Schumacher, testified, right now of every 5 members of Congress, less than 1 are veterans. Well, 40 years ago, of every 5 members of Congress, 4 out of every 5 were veterans. So not having those voices in Congress, most of the time, is not helpful. But when you look at even World War II and the demographics there, our country was half the size. We had about 160 million Americans, but over 16 million Americans served in World War II, so over 10%. When you look at Vietnam, 5.5 million Americans served in Vietnam, and now less than 1%, now 2.7 million Americans served in Iraq, Afghanistan, of the 330 million Americans. So understanding that, understanding where we are fiscally, I think is very, very important. I frankly, it's part of my job. One of my grinning things is saying, all right, when I go testify with General Milley, when I was acting secretary 4 times in front of the Senate, and asking for a certain amount and preparing for that, if they pass the budget, looks like it's not going to be passed, I don't think, before next week, before they break, but I think they'll do a CR, basically a 3-month CR, but come December, if we do pass the defense bills, which I think this year we should get there after the election in November, when they come back in November, December. The Army, as of right now, looks like they'll get every dollar we ask for, and an additional probably $3 billion if it stays on target, which hopefully it will. And I just left. I was with the senators at a Senate caucus, Army caucus breakfast. But I say those things because that's part of fighting for the Army, being a champion for the Army, and recognizing also that of the 3 departments within the Pentagon, we are the largest department and the least funded department. And we are in the people's business in the Army. And there's a philosophy, and again, I come from a joint family. My dad was in the Navy. My 2 uncles served in Vietnam in the Army, but my 2 grandfathers were in the Pacific with the Navy. My brother's done 2 deployments with the Air Force as doing search and rescue. But I will tell you, I'm the youngest of 3 in my family, and as you know, every generation gets better. So I know it's a joint crowd, but we're part of America's varsity team. We had some great JV teams in our military. For our Air Force and Navy brethren, you're a freshman team. The Marine Corps, we'll give them JV. But there is a difference, so we're brothers and sisters and we joke about this stuff. But in reality, there is a different philosophy between the branches. The Army and the Marine Corps, we're the land forces. And our philosophy is that we equip the man and the woman. And the Navy and Air Force, they man their equipment. But being in the people business means that we have to take care of our people. And that's what all of you do in this room, and it's so critically important. And when you look at the Army, we have 1,015,000 soldiers, again, total force. The average American soldier is not on active duty. The average American soldier is in the National Guard or Reserve, in the Reserve component. And we have almost 300,000 civilians. That's part of the Army team. We have a great team, and we're doing an incredible amount of work. And the one thing, when you look at budgets, and I'm not trying to bore you, and the morning classes at West Point when I taught were tough, so there's free coffee there, and I'm checking this group out too to make sure you're not falling asleep. But when you look at, I look at, the numbers. Last year for the 2017 budget, now a lot of people say, well, why do you care about the defense, health agency, why do you care about their budget? It's not necessarily the Army equity. It deals with the Army family, and I do care about it. So I think it was about $33.5 billion, which is about 5.7% of the Department of Defense overall bill. But $33.5 billion would be, as far as the Army, would be almost a quarter of our budget for this year. And so when I was on Armed Services and the Personnel Subcommittee, and I cared about interoperability, and this is what I talked to General Schumacher about, making sure that, we have Alta, Vista, and the DoD, and, we wanted commercial off the shelf, and we entered in this contract with Cerner for billions of dollars. As you know, it's the largest healthcare IT company in the world. And when you look at Cerner, they have Tenet Healthcare. They do some phenomenal things. But I was there yesterday with them saying, listen, I know we're behind schedule a little bit because of cybersecurity issues and some other things, but we got to get on with it. We got to make sure we're doing this because, what they're excited about is because it's the footprint of the Department of Defense, what they'll be able to do and how they've been very frank. They're like, we can now go to our other clients, and before when we talked about HIPAA, now we're talking about cybersecurity and those things, and we're talking about what we're learning from the Department of Defense. You are pushing us to be, we already felt like we were the best in the world. We're going to be even better because of our partnership and relationship with you. And then when you talk about the interoperability stuff, frankly, with the VA, I'm really hoping that the VA hasn't made a decision yet. I hope they go with Cerner, but Bob McDonald, Secretary McDonald, who's a former 82nd Airborne paratrooper like myself and West Point graduate, they'll get there. I'm not sure if they'll get there before the end of this administration, but I think they'll get there hopefully. But we'll make sure that we're doing it. And again, I know this is, electronic medical records are not exactly the most sexy thing for folks, but when you look at the technology that we have now, it literally saves us, it'll be saving us tens of millions of dollars, but also more importantly, it will save lives. And it'll get into the being proactive, not reactive. So, I know a lot of folks understand I'm aggressive. I was aggressive when I was, 27-year-old constitutional law professor at West Point. I was aggressive when I was jumping out of airplanes and helicopters, and I was aggressive when I was age 33 and being a congressman. And when I was a congressman, I didn't know if I was going to do 2 years or 20 years in Congress, but I said, no, I'm going to make my time here count. And I'm not here to talk politics, but let's be honest. I was the second Democrat in a century to represent Bucks County, Pennsylvania. Because I told people what I meant, and I meant what I said. And I told them what I was going to do, and I did it. And I was straight with people. Now, again, my wife's Republican, so I have a mixed marriage. I'm not here to talk politics. So I'm not talking about, there's an election in, 54 days. I care more about 80 days from now. 80 days from now, we have Army will beat Navy. And that's 80 days from today. And Army hasn't won since I was a professor at West Point. So I'm back on the Army team. We're going to move forward. I left West Point to go to Iraq, and then they lost once I left West Point. So now that I'm back in the team, I'm going to be spending a lot of time with the football team. We're 3-0 right now, which is pretty exciting. But when you look at these things, and even look at certain, we had a good relationship. We had a good conversation yesterday. But I was very clear with them that, listen, I understand the delays, but we got to move forward. And I said, listen, when I was at Brook, when I was at BAMC, and I said, they're last in line to get this. Does that make the most sense? And I was pushing them a little bit, but that's okay. But what they think as far as being proactive and not reactive on what we'll do with population health and some other things, making sure that we empower our soldiers and their families, and they have the records, and they have making sure. You look at things like, and I know this is probably not that exciting to people in this room. I think it's exciting. The new Apple Watch. The new Apple Watch, which is now, you look at Nike is partnering with the Apple Watch to come out with their own Nike watch because it's going to be GPS enabled. And some of the things that you're seeing out there, you look at companies, I've been to Nike now twice. If you don't know, Nike was started by an Army veteran. Did you all know that? So a guy, Bill Bowerman, was a student at the University of Oregon, was on the track team there. Pearl Harbor happened. He volunteered the next day, joined the Army, became an Army officer, went over to Europe, got the Silver Star, 4 Bronze Stars, came back home, became a high school track coach, then got the head coach job as the track coach at University of Oregon, his alma mater, and his student athlete was a guy by the name of Phil Knight. And Phil Knight and him started Nike in the back of a van using his wife's wildfire. It's now the largest sports apparel company in the world, $32 billion last year in revenue. Well, you look at, I'm a former college hockey player. You look at Wayne Gretzky. They said, how'd you get so many points? And he said 2 things. 1, you miss 100% of shots that you don't take. And 2, you don't pass the puck where people are, you pass the puck where they're going to be. And you look at entities like, whether it's Nike or Under Armour, I'm not here to endorse anybody, if there's lawyers in the room, okay? But you look at where they're going. They're a marketing company that sells shoes, frankly, but they're also a company that says, hey, listen, we can only sell so many shoes and apparel. What's next? And it's about sports performance, and it's about health, and it's about physical fitness. And you look at where they're going to, I'm not saying they're going to get into healthcare, but they're going to get into the performance area is where they see their growth, where they're going to be in 5 years, a $50 billion company. So, you look at how we can be part of that. We already have a relationship with Nike. They're going to be doing some stuff at West Point. They already make our uniforms, which is interesting, by the way. Army-Navy game will have Nike, and then Navy is Under Armour. So that'll be an interesting thing. That'll be an interesting dynamic. General Oniero is about to join the board of Under Armour, so I don't know who he'll be cheering for. Better be cheering for Army. He will be, I'm sure. But again, it's an interesting right now when you look at, and I was saying in a certain, how are you going to be able to tie this to folks? And, and I've talked about my time when I left Congress and I was in the private sector and with NBC, and, we had this thing called Vitality, and we got, extra points, and you got points basically if you joined the gym, you got partial reimbursement, and if you, did the blood test, you did physical, all that stuff that we do now in the Army, but we don't give as far as the benefits, meaning we don't give free T-shirts, we don't give the Amazon gift cards that you do in the private sector, and I understand, we have limited resources. But other things of showing people what they could do, I signed up in the Pentagon, and for those who haven't done it yet, I suggest you do it. The Fit to Win stuff is unbelievable with the body mass index and the VO2 box thing. It's some. I was with a chiropractor. Unfortunately, I woke up with a sore neck, and he's like looking at it, and he's like, "You can't really move your neck that much." And he's like, "Did you have trauma?" And I was like, "Well, I was in an Amtrak train crash a year ago." And he's like, "Did you get an X-ray?" He says, "No, I was good. I walked away from it after I came to. I was knocked unconscious." He's like, "Let me do a," I was like, "Okay." So, and he's basically like, "Hey, man, your neck is a little screwed up." I was like, "Oh." My wife says I'm a little crazy. But I tell these things because, listen, we're a family. And when we talk about being proactive, we talk about the Army family. It all comes down to are we taking care of our soldiers? And that's what Army Healthcare does. You are the most the best and the best expeditionary health force in the world. And I couldn't be more proud a couple of years ago when President Obama saw that there's thousands of people being killed in Africa with the Ebola disease, and he called on the Army, and we responded. I am proud of our soldiers. We make a positive difference wherever we are, whether it's home games or away games. And let's be clear, when the president or a governor of a state calls 911, they call the Army. When it was the governor of Louisiana, who, by the way, is a West Point graduate, when that Governor Edwards lost 13 folks in Louisiana to the flooding that were killed, he called the Louisiana Army National Guard. And we sent 1,300 of our soldiers to help solve that. When it's president, obviously with ISIS right now and what's going on there, and when it's Afghanistan, we make a positive difference. And sometimes we have to do a better job at, frankly, telling our story. Look at ISIS right now. Listen, they want to attack us and hurt us over here, but you look at what they're doing, the women over there, there's 3,000 women that are sex slaves right now in Iraq and in Syria. You look at Afghanistan. Before we went to Afghanistan, girls couldn't go to school in Afghanistan. 1 million of their kids went to Afghanistan. And that's part of the problem with when we're trying to retrain and pass things over is that we're trying to get the literacy rates up, which is difficult. But you look at now in Afghanistan, now 15 years later, girls now go to school, and 5 million more kids a year go to school in Afghanistan. From 1 million kids to 6 million kids because of the American soldier and our troops. We have a lot to be proud of. And one last thing, just because I was there and I'm passionate about it. You look at what happened just in the 90s and the 2000s. The worst ethnic cleansing in Europe since World War II, since millions of Jews were killed, was when thousands of Muslims were being killed in places like Bosnia and Kosovo. They loaded up Muslims, men, and teenagers on the buses, and they shipped them out, and they let them out in towns like Srebrenica, and they killed them on the side of the road. What was the American military? Mostly American soldiers. that went and put an end to that worst ethnic cleansing in Europe. We stopped Muslims from being killed, and they were being killed just because they were Muslims. And we have a lot to be proud of. When I lost 19 men in my unit in Iraq with 82nd Airborne Division, my brigade, one of them was a Muslim American who was trying to earn his citizenship. And he got it after he passed. But we have a lot to be proud of, these young men and women that are willing to die, fight for our nation, for the values that we believe in. But it's also our duty to make sure that we're doing everything we can to take care of them when they're within our ranks and we give them the proper transition. So with that, if it's okay, I'll stop and do question and answer. I think there's microphones if people.
Dispense with the cards and
Okay.
stand up. Eric.
Terrific.
Mr. Secretary, thanks very much for being
Yeah.
here, first of all, for your long service.
So a quick thank you and then a question.
Sure.
My thank you is for identifying and recognizing former Congressman Chet Edwards. A lot of people don't realize this, but the new hospital at Fort Bliss, the hospital at Fort Riley, the hospital at Belvoir, the hospital at Benning, the hospital at Hood, those are all Chet Edwards.
Yep.
And the initiative that you talked about. And that was almost single-handed on his part to get us the money to build those and to be farsighted. The question, I think it was General Dick Formica that coined the phrase that the Army is the rheostat for the Department of Defense and for the government. That is that we can turn down costs simply by getting rid of soldiers, whereas the Navy and the Air Force are heavily, equipment-related, building big ships and, tankers and everything else that certainly the nation needs. But the temptation always is when you start cutting dollars and when you're between wars, is you dial down the Army's soldiers. And yet when I watch, I'm an old fart retiree, so I watch a lot of TV now. And when I look at Air Force and Navy ads on TV, they look like Army ads. Because at the end of the ad, the guy on the ground or the woman looks like a soldier in knee pads and night vision goggles and an M4. And I'm asking myself, are we able to keep the focus on what you just talked about? You don't build a Zika virus vaccine as quickly as we've been able to do because you just start from ground zero. You don't build an HIV vaccine as the Army did from ground zero. You don't have an Ebola response without having a lot of investment in this. Is there recognition that we can't be the rheostat for the nation simply because we're backing down on these two theaters of war?
Yeah, well, sir, I appreciate your question. We need to. I don't think we're doing enough of a good job about it, and part of it's because our culture is that we're selfless servants, and we should remain selfless servants. But what I try to tell Naja and other folks, and I said, we need to have swagger about what we do. And it's not about bragging. I mean, if you can't brag about your teammates that you work with, then that's your problem. I'm not dissing to you. I'm saying what I tell these senior leaders, and I say to them, and go to where people are. I mean, I happen to read the newspaper every day because I love reading newspaper, but 90% of teenagers out there get their news from Facebook. And if our senior leaders are not on social media, they're wrong. And our other leaders, and our folks that are still leaders. And if you're not writing letters to the editor or guest opinions in the local, whether it's the Washington Post or the Richmond, whatever it is, the Richmond Dispatch, wherever you are, you should be writing. It's part of our culture. You should be talking about things and what we need to do. But let's face it, you're absolutely right. And my job, frankly, is I'm not afraid. I'm a hockey player, so I throw elbows every once in a while, and I make the arguments, and I do it within the construct of the Department of Defense with being a team player. But there's a reason why we got every dollar we asked for plus $3 million this year, because I make the case to Congress and let them know. We need to do more of what we have done to effectuate positive change in the world and in our own country. So part of that is getting after it with social media and traditional media as well, and doing it in a dynamic sense with pictures because people are visual. But if I could say right now, I mean, I joke about the Navy ads because according to their ads, every one of their folks is a SEAL, and it is what it is. But I will tell you, we have an ad agency It's called McCann Worldwide. We spend over $100 million a year on TV, and I was there because I spent some time in the TV business. What's great was I have 2 degrees from college. Neither one was in politics or journalism. I did both professionally. But I was frank with them. I said, what's our spend as far as on TV dollars versus digital dollars? And they said 70-30, $70, 70%. And I said, is that the right balance? I already knew what the answer was. It's being a jerk. As like when we're recruiting 18 to 24-year-olds to come into our ranks, and they're actually getting their news from their tablets and they're from their iPhones or Samsungs. And I was like, and because with the contracting, I always got to, I have to worry with the lawyers always giving me I couldn't tell them what to do because then that's changed the order and all that. But I said, I'm looking at this stuff and I'm looking at where, we're recruiting and where we need to do a better job. But I said to them, they showed commercials, and the commercials are great. And I like people jumping out of airplanes and stuff. I was like, and then there was one with, I said, but who is the target audience? And when I said to them, I was like, listen, the target audience, the millennials, when you look at our recruiting, we're hitting our recruitment this year. And a lot of folks said that we were not going to hit it this year because we took a lot last year from this year's recruits coming in, frankly. And so when I took the job, they basically said, Murphy, my advice to you is like, try to get in front of this because if you don't hit your recruitment goals this year, it's not going to look good. It's part of what you're graded on, et cetera. So I've made a real push on recruitment and what we're doing. But my point is that millennials actually want to serve. Millennials want to be part of an organization that's bigger than themselves, which helps us. So when I talk about the demographics that we're less than 1%, but we bring in 132,000 Americans every year into the Army, in the Joint Force, in the total Army. The unfortunate thing is more Americans go and study abroad. 300,000 Americans every year study abroad. And part of our problem is that, it has become a family business. And like I said, my brother's done too, my dad served, grandpa. But what that means is that it's for other families to do. When I joined at 19, I will tell you, I was dating a girl, and it was not my wife, so I could tell the story here. But her dad said to me, he's like, Patrick, like, why would you join the Army? Why would you join the Army or ROTC? He's like, you're in the dean's list. You have a scholarship, like, you're the captain of the collegiate hockey team. Like, you don't need to do this. And I said, I know, sir, I want to do it. And he's like, well, what would happen if a war broke out? Because this is 93, this is after Desert Storm. And I said, well, sir, I just want to serve my country. I want to become an Army officer. And then I can go do whatever the heck I want after that. But it was a foreign concept. And it shouldn't be a foreign concept. So I applaud, other folks that you serve with, like, Stan McChrystal, who is fighting, for things like the Franklin Project. Franklin Project's initiative where the expectation is every American will serve their country, whether it's the military, Peace Corps, Teach for America. And so I asked General McChrystal, because I'm a jerk like that. I asked a tough question. I said, hey, sir, not public on TV, but I said to him, how much would this cost if we're going to do this? It's like $16 billion. And not that it should come out of DOD, but I said it's $16 billion you could finance. It's a $3.4 trillion budget a year. And so I think we have to change the culture of America. But the one last thing I would say to you, especially for folks in this room that are passionate about healthcare, is that it is going to get harder for us, is the demographics, the propensity to serve, but the ability to serve as well. When 3 in 10 Americans can serve because of the obesity epidemic. And you look at that, and that's why, like, I'm a huge, when General West talks to me about the performance triad, it's about nutrition, exercise, sleep, I'm out there. And guess who else is trying to incorporate that? Nike and Under Armour, like, they get it. And that's why you're going to see Nike and Under Armour, they're going to get more in the nutrition fields. They're going to start selling Nike fitness bars and all that stuff. They're already getting into the watches and the wearables. So we just got to show that we're part of that positive, that we are ahead of our time, that we are, they're studying from us, they're learning from us, they're copying us, but we should also, tell the story that, hey, we just had the Rio Olympics. 2 Olympic athletes were Army soldiers. Most of your family and friends probably have no idea about that. Most of you in this room probably knew, but you should be telling that story. If you haven't told that story, put it on Facebook, because again, it's free chicken. You put it on Facebook, you don't have to pay for it. And it does take you a lot of time. And steal articles when you see a good article and put it on your Facebook page and make a little comment. And again, it sends our message. So I'm sorry for the long-winded answer your question, but when it comes to ads and when it comes to the things, I'm very aggressive on it. It's the audience of who we're trying to inspire to join our ranks. If you want to be part of America's varsity team, and I use that language purposely. If you want to be part of America's varsity team, if you want to make a positive difference in the world, you should join the Army. And then the other audience is to their parents as well. Because their parents, it is not helpful, and this is the last comment. Again, I want to answer other questions, but this was not a setup. But let me tell you about the influencers out there. Their parents and their grandparents and their aunts and uncles have a say in whether or not these young Americans join our military. You ask any recruiter. Because a lot of times they'll want to join, they're about to sign, they have to check with their mom and dad, and they come back, they want to. Let me tell you something. Their parents, if you ask the average American, you show them a picture of a homeless person, what they say? That's a veteran. And that's not the case. There are 5 myths out there that we have to debunk. And it's not helpful, by the way, when we have nonprofits that raise the money to fund their executives by victimizing our soldiers. For only $19 a month, you can do this. So it's not helpful and it hurts our brand. But let me tell you the 5 myths. 1, veterans are actually more likely to be employed than non-veterans. 2, veterans make $10,000 a year more in salary than non-veterans. 3, they're more likely to start a small business than non-veterans, and for that small business to be successful. And whether it's Nike or other companies we can talk about. 4, veterans are more likely to vote in elections no matter what their political persuasion is, because they want their voices to be heard, they love their country, and they just want to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And 5, veterans are more likely to be Little League coaches, pastors in their churches, and Boy Scout troop leaders, because they want to serve. They want to live a purpose-driven life. And they've had a purpose-driven life in the military, and they want to keep finding that when they get out of it. So we got to incorporate that and let people know. I mean, we got to brag about people in our ranks, and not just, again, you're part of the Army family. The average, there's 22 million veterans out there in America. More likely, they're Army veterans. They're us. And I know I can do my little stove too. I just care about the Department of the Army or the Department of Defense. I care about veterans because they're part of our family, and we should treat them like part of our family. So we talk about Soldier for Life, and it's a major initiative in the Army. And we say you are a soldier, you are a leader character for a lifetime of service. So whether you do 3 years or 30 years, you're part of our family, and you're expected to serve your nation. And we need you to continue to serve. And you got to talk about what that service, I always say I wouldn't have been a congressman at age 33 if it wasn't for the Army. I mean, I went from age 17 being a community college student, because I'm from, row house in Northeast Philadelphia, to 10 years later being a professor at West Point. That would not have happened if I wasn't given that leadership lesson at age 19 and competed when I was at Fort Knox, Kentucky at Cadet Basic Camp, against people from Harvard and Notre Dame. And I was like, man, I am just as good. If not, frankly, I was like, I'm better than these folks. And I proved it. And it gave me the confidence to go do great things. So I'm sorry for that long-winded question. I'd be honored to answer any others. I promise I'll keep it shorter. We're going to bring a microphone just for everybody. Oh, I'm sorry, your question. I'm sorry. Yep.
Yes, Honorable Murphy, thank you very much for being here. I never played hockey, but I do have 5 brothers. So I do have a question. We've heard this morning, so many things are relationship-based. It's messaging. It's tell our story. So my question is there an opportunity for the Army to move manpower billets into joint billets and give people, rather than being detailed to many joint billets, it seems that oftentimes the Army is detailed, the Air Force and the Navy commit to those joint billets, and therefore is that conversation being had? And as we know, you have to pay to play. You have to be at the table, and it seems oftentimes we're not at the table. Thank you.
So there's 2 things. One, you have to recognize for 15 years, 96% of casualties in Iraq and Afghanistan come from the Army and the Marine Corps. So we've been, and I'm not trying to, so we support the joint, and we do that. I was just at the Navy War College of Rhode Island because Senator Jack Reed had an event in the SPB there. It's a great war college, but 16% of the students are Army soldiers. So that part of it's important. On the whole, I'm not going to say how you framed it. but on the funding and some other things. We have gotten our heads kicked in on Capitol Hill. And part of it, you have to understand, there's not a natural base of support for war fighters, for land war fighters, frankly. There's a base of support for, frankly, the Joint Strike Fighter and that great $400,000 helmet that it cost. And I'm for the Joint Strike Fighter. I don't know why we need over 2,200 of them, but that's, you know, I'm not in the Navy and Air Force. But I would say to you, an Ohio-class submarine, all that stuff. So again, I support those initiatives, but there's not a defense contractor saying, beside AUSA, which isn't a defense contractor, but we need to do a better job. And frankly, what I give General Milley a lot of credit for, frankly, who, by the way, he's a Murphy. If you didn't know, his mother was a Murphy, so we're basically cousins. He's the Boston side, I'm the Philadelphia side. But what all of our leadership does is that we talk about the total Army force and the National Guard Reserve. The National Guard is one of the most effective ground, and I know they can't lobby, but they are effective, and they have the voices, they have the ears of those senators and those Congress on the Hill. But the last thing I would say to you, we have to do a better job is when you go to the Pentagon, whether you, I think you're a colonel, other folks, that's a positive thing. It is not a bad sentence. And we got to get, and again, I'm a huge, you know, obviously operational and tactical level, and I've done it in 2 deployments, but it's important to get the headquarters experience and to get the Hill experience so you're comfortable, so you do it, you know, as a junior officer, meaning, you know, as a major, et cetera. Well, that's not junior, but you know what I mean. Like lower field grade, and then when you're back, it's not your first rodeo when you're a general officer. And we got to do a better job at using that and cycling folks through, because it makes us more effective as an entity, as an institution. And we've kind of frowned upon it in years past, and we got to get over that. And I think even General Milley would tell you the same thing.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for your time. I'm not aware of any option in the Army for civilian personnel who want to serve briefly and then go back to their job. And I think what we lost in the Army was the opportunity to let the average American touch the magic that was going on for the last 15 years.
I'm going to write that down. Touch the magic. I like that. Okay.
And specifically, when we talk about how our health care needs were stretched, there were hundreds of civilian surgeons, nurses, et cetera, that would have been happy to go for 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to Bagram or to Bastion and serve, but they couldn't sign up for 2 years and leave their practice. What I'm looking for you is help us devise a methodology across all warfighting functions, but specifically in health, to how do we pull them in for a 4 or 8 week rotation where, you know, I don't really have to teach them how to shit in a pot, and I don't have to teach them, right, to put an iodine tablet in their water. The reality is I just need to teach them how to put on their body armor and their Kevlar and get in a bunker, because the real threat is indirect, otherwise, right? So what I would ask is, can we get after that concept of when we need to surge, let's talk about the nation surging, not just the Army surging, and therefore we need mechanisms to allow them to do that.
Yeah.
Sure,
so, Colonel, I appreciate that. You're absolutely right. I think it's amazing what you can do in the world when you give someone else credit for it. And that's why I give credit, honestly, to Ash Carter, Secretary of Defense Carter, who's testifying right now with the chairman, on the Force of the Future. So if you could help us create ways, and I'll work with Surgeon General of how we could do that. And frankly, you know, I think we could use it, frankly, more in National Guard and Reserves, especially, and get them used to it. So, and even if it's backfilling, frankly, you know, in hospitals, you know, when we have those, you know, active duty folks that have to deploy, et cetera, that might be a way around it. But and even if they're not soldiers, even if they're civilians, what we could do is Army, Civilian Corps, et cetera. There's a lot of things that we could do. And I think we have to not just talk about it, we have to find creative solutions on that. So the one thing, if I just make one pitch, I don't know if you know, but as a chief management officer is my title as undersecretary, and basically the COO of the Army, is business operations. And a lot of folks, we used to have an innovation program in the Army, and we got rid of it because it cost too much money, and we didn't have enough staff to keep up with all the ideas. Well, now, October 1st with AUSA, we're announcing the Army Ideas for Innovation, where it's folks who could go and give their ideas, and it gets crowdsourced. People, that's a good idea, a bad idea, you can vote on it, et cetera. Now, you have to have a CAC card usually, but there's some other ways we could work with you you'll be fine, but other folks who used to serve, of giving ideas on like the Army Civilian Corps or Army Civilian Medical Corps, whatever we can call it, and how we could do that and get it out there. And then, we will farm that out to our Office of Business Transformation, working with the Surgeon General on how we can incorporate this, and with General Lucky, who's head of the reserves, and Tim Cadavy, National. And these are the things that Ash Carter is looking for. So I think we're primed to do it. And I don't just say that like, hey, it's a great idea, and 6 months later, like, man, I really felt great about it. I mean, I remember I was an Army captain, and I talked to the General Counsel of the Army, was visiting West Point, and I was a professor there, and I had no business standing in front of 600 other faculty members, but I did, and I raised a question. I said, hey, listen, we're 9/11. I'm leaving on my deployment in a couple weeks, but, I teach constitutional law at West Point here, sir, and I said, do we need to have the don't ask, don't tell policy? It's been now, at that point, it was like almost a decade old. I said, I was like, we kicked out thousands of folks just because of who they were, not because they're, and I said, and I'm a straight guy, blah, 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 Catholic, but I was like, and he goes, do you think we should? I'm like, yeah. I said, because we actually desegregated our Army in the middle of the Korean War, when half the country was segregated. And I was like, so we should definitely do that now. This is, and he's like, can you write me up something on that? I wrote him a 4-page memo I worked on that weekend, that I thought was brilliant. And I got a form letter back, and I was so pissed off because he, it was like basically like, F you, Captain Murphy, which is fine, But when I became acting secretary, and and I had a student that was a football player at West Point, and the New York Giants signed him to be the long snapper, and we wouldn't let him play. And I remember like fighting again. I was a captain, but I'm a fighter my whole life. But I remember going to the soup and hey, sir, can we look at this? And I'd go through the chain. Let me talk. It went nowhere. It is what it is. Well, guess what? Now at West Point, because we're talking about talent management, frankly. Now at West Point, or ROTC or elsewhere, if you are drafted by a major sports organization, you can now go play professional sports as an Army soldier. You just have to go to National Guard or Reserves. That's called the Kelsey Minato rule. And Kelsey Minato was a basketball player at West Point, all-time leading scorer, the only active cadet to get her number retired. That's how beloved she was. And the WNBA, the San Antonio Stars, signed her in a contract, and we let her go, 2 10-day contracts. Now, that will also help, by the way, us recruit heroes, because let's face it, if you're an 18-year-old high school student and you're a top athlete, and you say, man, I really would love to go to West Point, serve my country, but you know what? I'm getting recruited by Alabama and Notre Dame and Stanford, and I can go to Stanford, and if I make it, I could go play the pros, but if I went to West Point, I can't go play in the pros. And I understand people say, well, David Robinson was like 7 foot tall. I mean, come on, all right? And Roger's talking, again, so it's a new rule that we now changed. These are positive. I mean, we are doing great things, but there's a lot more things that we could be doing. We just got to work together and push each other. So, thanks, guys. All right. Thanks, everybody. I really appreciate it. Thanks for